Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening just a vast stack of source material focused on one of the most polarizing, dynamic, and frankly, pretty disruptive figures in modern American political media, Candace Owens.
Yeah.
She's really mastered the art of the ideological pivot and, constant outrage. And the material we have, it paints a truly complex picture of her strategy.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And our sources reveal not just the content of her views, but the highly strategic framework she seems to use. For you, the listener, our goal here is rigorous analysis.
Right.
We are not here to endorse or condemn her positions, obviously, but rather to provide a clear, thorough dissection of the factors that have cemented her status as what many observers call an architect of outrage.
That's the mission. So we'll trace her remarkable, definitely nonlinear career path, deconstruct the core political doctrines she champions like Blexit, analyze the profound ideological schisms she has navigated, especially regarding anti-Semitism, and explore her very recent escalation into some extreme conspiracy theories.
Including that high-stakes international defamation lawsuit.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this and start at the beginning because, to understand the present, we have to look closely at the origin story.
And what's really essential to grasp is that the foundation of her current brand, this whole narrative of fighting back against persecution,
right,
it was established quite early.
Right.
And critically, when she was on the complete opposite side of the political spectrum. She was raised in Stamford, Connecticut, and experienced a really defining, quite traumatic event back in 2007.
This was when she was just a 17-year-old high school senior.
Right.
And it wasn't like a minor thing.
Oh, far from it. She was a target of a series of severe racist death threats left on her voicemail.
Wow.
By a group of white male classmates. The messages were apparently so severe that the city's superintendent of schools at the time called them absolutely horrendous.
Okay.
So this direct, verifiable experience with racial hatred led to a successful lawsuit against the Stanford Board of Education. It culminated in a pretty significant $37,500 settlement in early 2008.
So she possesses this, legal, irrefutable evidence of having been a victim of racial prejudice and real threat. How does she then leverage that specific historical trauma in her later conservative rhetoric?
Well, it becomes a primary shield, really. Our sources note that she frequently references this event and also her family's historical experiences under Jim Crow. To bolster her argument that, modern concerns about systemic racism or white supremacy are just overblown. Her argument basically is, I know real racism, this thing you're talking about now, this is it.
Yeah.
She speaks from this position of authority, claiming that historical injustices are distinct, they're resolved, and therefore current identity politics movements just exaggerate contemporary disadvantage.
Yet immediately after this incident, her political identity was, diametrically opposed to where she is now. She was firmly anti-conservative.
Absolutely. Yeah. Prior to 2016, she co-founded and wrote for a website called Degree 180.
Yeah.
She was operating primarily as an anti-conservative blogger.
Right.
And to really appreciate the scale of her ideological transformation, you just have to look at her published work from 2015.
Okay, what did she say?
She was actively mocking the batshit crazy antics of the Republican Tea Party. That's a direct quote.
Wow.
And she expressed genuine hope that this wing of the party would eventually die off, peacefully in their sleep, we hope, and then we can get right on with the obvious social progress.
So her initial alignment wasn't just casually liberal, it was actively hostile toward the conservative movement she later championed.
Exactly. Actively hostile.
So what was the mechanism? What was the single event that triggered such a drastic shift? That brings us to the crucial pivot point. The failure of her 2016 tech venture, the Social Autopsy Project.
Yeah, this failure is probably the most instructional moment of her early career. In 2016, she launched Social Autopsy as an anti-cyberbullying initiative. The core concept was highly sophisticated and, let's be honest, immensely problematic. It aimed to create a publicly searchable database linking anonymous, offensive online posts. Racism, misogyny, just general trolling to the real-world identities of the users who made them.
So it was meant to be an accountability tool, but it was immediately perceived as something else entirely.
Exactly. An instrument for public shaming and exposure. The online reaction was immediate and fierce.
Straight away.
Oh, yeah. It was widely condemned as an engine for doxing and a gross violation of privacy. Kickstarter rapidly suspended the funding campaign. And amidst this blowback, Owens herself became a target and was doxxed. But instead of seeing this as maybe proof of the danger of her own project, she saw opportunity in the conflict.
This is where she learned the core business lesson, isn't it? That conflict equals attention.
It is. She blamed the failure and the persecution she felt squarely on progressives and the liberal mob. And crucially, she found unexpected, immediate, and very vocal support from the anti-progressive right. Figures associated with the Gamergate movement, people like Milo Yiannopoulos and Mike Cernovich, these were audiences already sort of primed to believe they were victims of liberal censorship and overreach.
So the light bulb moment wasn't just conflict generates attention, but specifically, framing conflict as persecution by a liberal mob is a potent strategy for building a loyal following. It sounds like a complete shift in her business model.
Precisely. The failure of the venture gave her an audience ready-made to believe her victim narrative, and that audience also happened to be politically conservative.
Right.
This led to her very public, she called it, an overnight conversion. In her own words, she stated, "I became a conservative overnight. I realized that liberals were actually the racists. Liberals were actually the trolls."
Wow.
The shift was complete. The same people who she felt victimized her were now her allies, and her former allies were the persecutors.
And from that conversion, the Red Pill Black brand was born, signaling this new identity.
Yeah, and the name itself is crucial jargon. It references the red pill concept, which, originated in right-wing online circles, particularly from the Matrix film. Taking the red pill signifies an awakening to a hidden, often painful political truth. The realization that liberal narratives about race, gender, economics, whatever, are fabrications designed to control you.
So by adopting Red Pill Black, she immediately signaled to this new receptive audience that she'd awakened and was ready to share the truth.
Exactly. And the content she produced immediately aligned with this strategy.
How so?
It was pure provocation, designed to generate maximum media outrage. Her video titles were just crafted to shock, directly challenging progressive dogma. We have examples like "I don't care about Charlottesville," the KKK, or white supremacy.
Right, that'll do it.
Yeah. This strategy established a career pattern. Use explosive rhetoric to provoke a massive reaction, claim victimhood and persecution when criticized, and then consolidate that resulting audience loyalty.
Okay, so having solidified her conservative identity and mastered this art of provocation, she immediately went after the ideological foundation of the civil rights movement, launching the Blexit Doctrine.
The Blexit, yeah. Launched in 2018, it's a portmanteau Black and Exit, and it really is the core of her political platform. It explicitly urges Black Americans and other minority groups to leave the Democratic Party.
Arguing what? That their loyalty is misplaced.
Essentially, yeah. That their historical loyalty to the Democrats is actually self-destructive.
And the centerpiece of this entire doctrine is that inflammatory Democrat plantation metaphor. Let's delve into the mechanics of that claim.
This is the central and probably the most controversial rhetorical device in her arsenal. She argues that the Democratic Party system, through policies like welfare and affirmative action, it creates a state of enforced dependency.
Okay.
And perpetuates a mentality of Black inferiority. By using the word plantation, she doesn't just mean a political party. She's alleging that the Democrats are the modern-day slavers.
Wow. It's a sophisticated rhetorical inversion, isn't it? She co-opts the language of slavery and liberation, plantation, escape, emancipation, and completely flips its historical meaning.
Exactly. She replaces the historical oppressors, slave owners, segregationists, with modern Democrats and, quote, white liberals. The goal seems twofold. First, provide a moral framework for Black individuals to exit the Democratic Party without feeling they're betraying their heritage.
Right.
And second, to completely neutralize any accusation of racism against her new conservative allies by casting progressives as the true oppressors, maintaining control through systemic poverty and identity politics.
This attempts to turn the whole systemic racism argument on its head, suggesting the system that hurts Black Americans is actually the liberal welfare state.
Precisely. And this rhetorical framework leads directly to her profound skepticism about the existence and impact of systemic racism in modern America. She frames the discussion not as one of historical disadvantage, but one of personal responsibility. She argues that discussing white supremacy and nationalism is just a distraction from internal issues within the Black community that she feels impede advancement.
And she uses that personal shield we discussed earlier, her 2007 experience, to lend credibility to this dismissal of systemic disadvantage.
She uses it as a firewall against critique, absolutely. Her statement that she cannot be a victim of systemic racism because she has never been a slave in this country.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's intended to draw a hard line.
Yeah.
If you haven't experienced physical slavery or explicit Jim Crow violence, your claims of systemic disadvantage are exaggerated or maybe even manufactured.
And this goes hand in hand with her stance on the Black Lives Matter movement.
Completely. She doesn't recognize BLM as a civil rights organization.
Not at all.
No. She consistently characterizes it as a vehicle for black anarchy and a dangerous, politically manipulative movement. She focuses heavily on questioning their financial transparency and arguing that their rhetoric encourages lawlessness and resentment rather than, genuine societal reform.
Her rhetoric is perhaps most inflammatory and maybe had the most direct consequence when discussing victims of police violence, like George Floyd.
Without a doubt. She has consistently labeled high-profile figures like George Floyd as thugs and criminals, arguing that their past actions, often involving arrests or drug use, completely negate their victim status in cases of police brutality. She argues the media and activists wrongly elevate these figures to martyrdom.
And this stance became the basis for her 2022 documentary, The Greatest Lie Ever Sold, George Floyd and the Rise of BLM.
Yeah, the film was designed to prove that the global protests following Floyd's death were founded on a deliberate deception, exploited for political gain. But what's crucial here is tracing the direct causal link that our sources highlight.
What link?
The film provided the factual basis, however thin or contested, for other major personalities to spread misinformation. Shortly after the film's release and its subsequent praise, Kanye West, or Ye, repeated the false claim that Floyd died from a fentanyl overdose rather than the actions of Derek Chauvin. Her media production acted as a direct vector for dangerous misinformation, disseminated by another massive celebrity voice.
And the selectivity of her framing of violence is key here too, right? She characterizes BLM protests as existential anarchy, yet she publicly dismissed the January 6th insurrection as virtually nothing.
Yeah, that contrast demonstrates a clear partisan application of morality, or at least perceived morality. Violence and disruption are threats to the state only when they come from groups aligned against her political ideology.
Right.
When violence is committed by those who align with her, or against those she opposes, it's minimized or recontextualized as maybe a justifiable reaction. It maintains her narrative of the conservative movement being the perpetual victim.
Okay. This escalation in rhetoric led her to the next phase of her career, which was defined by these ideological schisms and professional fallout, particularly involving anti-Semitism. This really tested the limits of her conservative media platform.
It really did. And this specific type of controversy began quite early, actually, back in 2018, during a Turning Point UK event where she was discussing nationalism. This is where she made the infamous comments regarding Hitler.
Okay, let's detail that incident and the reaction, because that was huge at the time.
It was. When defending the concept of nationalism, she stated that if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine.
Oh, oof.
She then pivoted, claiming his actual problem was his desire to globalize. The statement was immediately and frankly universally condemned, because in trying to make this sort of academic distinction between nationalism and globalism, she dangerously minimized the inherent evil of Hitler's domestic persecution of Jews, which was, the primary purpose of his rise to power.
What were the immediate repercussions within the conservative media ecosystem? People weren't happy.
No. The fallout was significant. It led to widespread condemnation from many conservative figures who deemed the remarks just beyond the pale. And it ultimately led to her resignation from her position at Turning Point USA in May 2019.
Did she try to walk it back?
Oh, yeah. Her subsequent defense, that she was misquoted and that she always considered Hitler a homicidal, psychopathic maniac, it failed to fully retract the damage. The incident permanently introduced this highly sensitive topic into her brand narrative.
And the issue resurfaced with much greater intensity and much less ambiguity in 2022 during her defense of Kanye West's anti-Semitic comments.
This was a clear escalation. After Ye tweeted his threat of DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, Owens immediately defended him, making the remarkable public claim, if you are an honest person, you did not find this tweet anti-Semitic. She was actively trying to rewrite the definition of anti-Semitism to exclude Ye's direct threats.
But what's crucial here is a specific anti-Semitic trope she deployed to defend him on her show, right? It wasn't just a general defense.
No, she went further than just defending the tweet. She introduced a specific conspiracy theory. She claimed that Yi was being targeted by a powerful, shadowy cabal of Jews operating in Hollywood. And to make this concept relatable, she used a really shocking analogy, comparing this alleged powerful Jewish ring in Hollywood to street gangs like the Bloods and the Crips.
Wow.
Which is recognized by anti-defamation organizations as promoting a classic anti-Semitic canard. The idea of a secretive, powerful, organized Jewish group, the Ring or Cabal, controlling industries like media and entertainment for nefarious ends. She was actively circulating a contemporary version of a very old conspiracy theory.
And this trajectory placed her in direct conflict with her then-employer, the Daily Wire, especially after the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel.
Right. Following the attack, Owens made a decisive shift. She became a very strident, very vocal critic of Israel's military response, repeatedly accusing the state of genocide.
Which was a non-starter for the Daily Wire.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially given that its co-founder, Ben Shapiro, is staunchly pro-Israel.
This created that public, really dramatic feud with Shapiro. And when he criticized her, she responded using what were widely interpreted as anti-Semitic dog whistles. I need to define those clearly.
Yeah, the exchange was highly volatile, mostly played out on social media. After Shapiro publicly criticized her commentary as disgraceful, she responded with the biblical verse, "You cannot serve both God and money."
Okay, and why is that seen as a dog whistle?
Well, that phrase is heavily associated with the anti-Semitic trope linking Jews to financial greed and material control. It's historically loaded. And she followed this up with the phrase, "Christ is king."
Which, again, on its own might seem innocuous, but in context.
Exactly. Well, it's a common phrase used by Christians. When deployed in direct response to criticism from a prominent Jewish figure like Shapiro, it becomes a rhetorical device often used by the far right. It signals Christian nationalism in opposition to perceived Jewish influence in public life. It attempts to frame the disagreement not as a political debate, but as a religious conflict where her Christian faith is supposedly being challenged by Jewish interests.
And the apex of this controversy involved her engagement with an extreme historical conspiracy theory.
Yes. Our sources note that she actually liked a post on X, formerly Twitter, that referenced the medieval blood libel conspiracy theory.
Can you briefly explain what that is for listeners?
Sure. Blood libel is the ancient, completely false, and incredibly vicious accusation that Jews ritually murder Christian children to use their blood in religious rites. It is one of the most dangerous and damaging historical anti-Semitic myths. By associating herself with a post referencing it, even just by liking it, she reached an ideological point that proved professionally fatal for that relationship.
And this professional consequence finally manifested in March 2024.
That's right. Her relationship with the Daily Wire officially ended. It was pretty much universally attributed to her relentless anti-Semitic commentary and her ideological divergence from the company's very clear, non-negotiable pro-Israel stance. The Daily Wire episode is proof that while the mainstream conservative ecosystem often thrives on provocation, there was an ideological red line there, and she crossed it.
But she, of course, reframed this dismissal as a victory, didn't she?
Absolutely. In keeping with her, persecution complex narrative, she framed her departure as, "The rumors are true, I am finally free."
Right.
Suggesting she was unburdened from institutional constraints that kept her from speaking the truth. Her exit essentially pushed her fully into the realm of independent media, where those institutional guardrails, for better or worse, no longer exist.
And now we transition to the period where, free from those guardrails, she has branched out dramatically into, well, pure conspiracy territory, moving far beyond race in Israel. Let's start with her commentary on public health during the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, her commentary during the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent vaccine rollout clearly demonstrated a willingness to promote large-scale, factually unsupported claims, often relying on, frankly, deliberate misinterpretation of public documents.
Can you detail some of those specific false claims she championed between, say, 2020 and 2022?
Sure. One of the most inflammatory claims was her concentration camps theory. She falsely alleged that the CDC planned to put high-risk Americans into designated camps.
Where did she get that from?
It was based on a radical misinterpretation of a CDC document about potentially shielding vulnerable populations in specific settings if needed. She immediately linked this to practices in 1930s Germany.
Wow.
This wasn't just anti-policy rhetoric, it was conspiracy-driven fear-mongering about government control and oppression. She also baselessly and repeatedly linked COVID-19 vaccines to sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, or SADS, and to blood clots, often just ignoring medical consensus entirely.
Her anti-vaccine rhetoric was so prominent that it caused a public break with one of her most important political allies, former President Donald Trump. That was notable.
That was a significant moment, yeah. During an interview, Trump publicly pushed back against her anti-vaccine stance. He stated clearly that the vaccines were safe and effective, and that she was wrong to promote such fear. That instance really highlighted how far outside even the political mainstream her specific brand of misinformation had taken her, causing friction even with the figurehead of the party she was promoting.
And her inflammatory commentary extended equally to the LGBTQ+ community.
Her rhetoric here has been exceptionally severe. She referred to the entire LGBTQ+ movement as having brought with it a sexual plague on our society.
Just sexual plague.
Yep. Furthermore, she repeatedly described the transgender rights movement in the most extreme, demonizing terms possible, calling it satanic, evil, and dangerous. She frames the fight for transgender rights not as a civil rights issue, but as an existential, corrupting moral force targeting children and biological reality.
And she moved beyond just condemnation to explicitly advocating for social discrimination.
She did. She suggested in pretty uncertain terms on her platform that society would be safer and more moral if people actually discriminated more.
Discriminated more?
Yeah. She advised listeners to lean into their heebie-jeebies, her words, when encountering individuals who look weird, making it pretty clear she was referring to transgender individuals. She explicitly argued that gut, prejudicial feelings of discomfort should override principles of tolerance and civil rights.
Okay. This brings us to the height of her escalation into global conspiracy. The bizarre, thoroughly debunked theory about the First Lady of France, Brigitte Macron.
This is truly extraordinary territory. She championed the completely unsubstantiated theory that Brigitte Macron is actually a transgender woman who was born male and named Jean-Michel Trogneux. Who is, in reality, Brigitte's actual living younger brother. This is a level of conspiracy that just merges transphobia with high-level political deception claims.
And she didn't just mention it, she staked her entire credibility on it and dedicated immense resources to the claim.
Right. She invested heavily. She dedicated an entire 8-part podcast series called Becoming Brigitte to exploring this theory. She publicly declared that she would stake my entire professional reputation on the claim being true.
Wow.
And what's more, the associated theory she promoted spun rapidly out of control, linking the purported deception to identity theft, possible grooming, incest, and even these grand, elite global conspiracies involving the Rothschilds and the remnants of the CIA's culture program. Just wild stuff.
What's the counter-evidence to this complex web of claims? Is there any?
The counter-evidence is overwhelming and publicly available. Official birth announcements, numerous childhood photos showing Brigitte clearly as female, and the simple fact that Jean-Michel Trogneux exists, he's publicly seen, he's known to be her actual brother.
Right.
French authorities and reputable sources have debunked this claim repeatedly. Yet, for the conspiratorial mindset, the lack of evidence often only fuels the belief.
And this specific claim led to the most tangible, high-stakes consequence yet. The international defamation lawsuit.
Yes, in July 2025, President Emmanuel Macron and First Lady Brigitte Macron filed a major defamation lawsuit against Owens in a U.S. court, in Delaware specifically.
Okay.
This is a high-profile move, seeking substantial damages and accusing Owens of leading a campaign of global humiliation. The suit is particularly notable because the Macrons apparently plan to present scientific evidence, which could mean medical records or expert testimony, to conclusively prove Brigitte was born female.
This really demonstrates the global legal stakes of misinformation. But what is the unifying theme connecting the Macron claims, the COVID misinformation, her skepticism of systemic racism? Is there a thread?
I think the central unifying worldview that underpins her entire platform is the conviction that modern progressive society is not just wrong, but actively satanic, unnatural, and controlled by malicious, deceiving forces.
How so?
Well, COVID vaccines are framed as unnatural biological interventions. The LGBTQ+ movement is an unnatural deviation from traditional order. The Macron theory, at its core, alleges a fundamental deception about biological reality at the highest levels of global power. Her brand requires her audience to believe that the established world order is actively malicious and deceiving them about basically everything they see and trust.
Okay. This brings us to the mechanics of her success. It's not just what she says, but how she employs her rhetorical strategy. Let's analyze the specific playbook she seems to use.
The first pillar is probably the just asking questions, or J-keying approach. This is a classic conspiratorial tactic where she frames incendiary, often baseless statements as innocent inquiries or musings, thereby maintaining plausible deniability.
How did she use that during the Kanye West defense, for example?
Right. When she promoted the anti-Semitic trope about a powerful Jewish ring in Hollywood, she carefully avoided asserting it as a hard fact. Instead, she offered it as, food for thought, right? Or it makes you wonder.
Mm-hmm.
This rhetorical distancing allows her to inject deeply damaging, potentially legally risky ideas into the public consciousness without taking full ownership. It forces her critics to expend effort debunking a premise she only suggested.
The second critical pillar seems to be the persecution complex, where she shifts the debate away from the substance of her claims toward a narrative of martyrdom.
This is her engine for loyalty, absolutely. We saw this most clearly in the Ben Shapiro feud. Rather than address Shapiro's critique of her anti-Semitism, she reframed the entire conflict. She shifted the focus to her Christian faith, positioning herself as a devout believer persecuted by institutional powers, often linked to money and secularism in her narrative for speaking the truth. She transforms substantive political criticism into evidence of herself as a victimized martyr, which is highly effective for consolidating her base.
And finally, the strategic leveraging of her identity.
The paradox here is her unique selling proposition, really.
Yeah.
She uses her identity as a Black woman to lend powerful, authentic-seeming credibility to arguments that dismiss systemic racism and dismantle identity politics.
Right.
She positions herself as the ultimate insider who broke free from the Democrat plantation. This allows her to make arguments that, coming from a white commentator, might be instantly rejected as racist, but coming from her are instead validated by her audience as courageous defiance of progressive norms.
Okay. The most recent claims demonstrate that this strategy is escalating, reaching what even former allies are calling the extreme edge. We have to discuss her challenge to the official narrative following the murder of Charlie Kirk.
Right. Following the September 2025 assassination of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk, Owens immediately rejected the official narrative. She began suggesting a broader conspiracy involving intense Israeli influence and donor pressure on Kirk.
She used leaked texts as part of her evidence, correct? What did they supposedly show?
Yes. She highlighted leaked group chat texts, purportedly from Kirk just 48 hours before his death, where he expressed profound frustration, saying something like, "I have no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause."
Wow.
He specifically referenced pressure from major donors like Bill Ackman. Owens argued this demonstrated immense pressure and insinuated that his death was a consequence of his evolving geopolitical stance.
But her rhetoric rapidly escalated far beyond donor pressure into full-blown state conspiracy territory.
It became extremely explicit. She began drawing clear parallels between Kirk's death and the JFK assassination, suggesting that the same people who killed JFK are running Israel.
That's quite a leap.
It's a monumental, baseless escalation. Furthermore, she suggested the Trump administration was involved in covering up the truth of Kirk's death, claiming to see a Fed signature on the official story. This even caused her to declare she has lost faith in Trump himself over it.
This level of extremity finally pushed away some of her former allies, didn't it?
This was clearly a breaking point for many. Kirk's own pastor, Rob McCoy, and prominent conservative figures like Steven Crowder publicly and quite emotionally rebuked her for disrespecting the family and spreading damaging misinformation during a time of tragedy. And the theories only became more and more outlandish, expanding to include elements that just lacked any grounding in reality, like an underground bee cult and a time-warp Egyptian plane, just really out there.
Which leads us to maybe the absolute edge of recent extremism. The claims about tech leaders being non-human hybrids. This happened very recently, late October 2025.
This seems to represent the current frontier of her conspiratorial thinking. She suggested on her platform that leading tech figures, specifically Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and Peter Thiel, are not fully human, but are some kind of hybrids, possibly linked to AI or transhumanist technology.
She used specific, quite visceral language to describe their supposed non-human nature, didn't she?
She did. She stated they just look like an Apple software, suggesting a synthetic quality. She took the claims further by musing about their physicality, saying that if she stabbed you, she said no if they bleed all the way, suggesting that perhaps a battery would fall out.
Wow, okay.
She links this bizarre transhumanist narrative directly to her broader rejection of AI and technological progress as inherently demonic and godless forces meant to erode human nature.
And the reaction to this was immediate mockery and concern, even from people previously sympathetic.
It was intense. These claims immediately drew comparisons to the most fringe conspiracy theories. notably David Icke's reptilian theories. Reports surfaced of fellow conservatives privately urging her to seek psychiatric help. It signaled a significant break with perceived reality for many who had previously accepted her political provocations but found this level of extremism just unsupportable.
Let's pull back then and synthesize the real-world impact. This strategic controversy has led to some high-stakes, tangible consequences that most political commentators never face.
That's absolutely right. The consequences extend beyond just professional media fallout. In October 2024, for instance, the Australian government denied her a visa for a scheduled speaking tour. This is governmental censure based purely on her rhetoric.
How significant is it when a government applies a character test based purely on someone's online rhetoric?
It is extremely significant. Australia's Home Affairs Minister at the time, Tony Burke, cited her failure of the country's character test, specifically due to her history of making extremist and inflammatory comments toward Muslim, Black, Jewish, and LGBTQIA+ communities. This action demonstrates a direct collision between American free speech culture, which largely protects such rhetoric under the First Amendment, and stricter international legal and immigration norms that often prioritize social cohesion and aim to prevent the importation of perceived hate speech.
And we must reiterate the seriousness of the Macron defamation lawsuit as well.
Yeah, that lawsuit presents a clear and present legal threat. It seeks substantial damages and demonstrates that her speech, even if protected by the First Amendment in the U.S., can still expose her to severe legal and financial jeopardy when it involves international public figures who operate under much stricter defamation laws.
So, synthesizing all this information, we are left with a pretty clear conclusion about her career architecture, it seems.
I think we can conclude that her enduring controversy is not accidental. It's the calculated and intended outcome of a highly sophisticated media strategy built on three core self-reinforcing components, which are consistently generating provocative, often factually unsupported claims, strategically leveraging her identity as both a shield and a weapon, and exhibiting a real mastery of confrontational communication.
So the final synthesis is that the controversy is the core feature of the brand. It's not a bug, it's the feature.
And this is precisely what maintains the listener bond. For her loyal base, these very real professional and legal repercussions, the dismissal from the Daily Wire, the Australian travel ban, the international lawsuit, they serve only to validate her narrative.
How so?
They confirm her story as a persecuted freethinker and truth-teller, standing up to a global, corrupt establishment. Every institutional attack only strengthens their loyalty and belief in her mission.
Wow. That was an immense and incredibly complex amount of ground to cover. From a private cyberbullying initiative failure back in 2016 that taught her the power of outrage, all the way to an international lawsuit involving the First Lady of France and an Australian travel ban in 2025. It's just a remarkable trajectory of strategic polarization.
The unifying thread, as you can see, is that the controversy is not incidental to her career, but the very engine of her success. She uses a complex, yet clearly effective blend of identity politics and version and a constant narrative of victimhood to maintain relevance and consolidate a base that feels similarly alienated from the mainstream.
So what does this all mean for you, the well-informed learner, observing this, strategic chaos?
Well, I think this deep dive raises an important question. In a media landscape where a sophisticated strategy of polarization is the primary business model, a model that's demonstrably effective despite leading to professional, governmental, and even international legal consequences, is the line between political commentator, conspiracy theorist, and maybe even performance artist permanently blurred. And perhaps more importantly, what is this strategic manufacturing of outrage ultimately costs the public discourse when the truth becomes secondary to the spectacle? Something to think about as you process everything we've unpacked today.